So, Berto, we have a bunch of emails from patrons of the podcast who have questions for you and me, and I thought we would read those questions, answer them on the air so that everyone can benefit or disbenefit from the conversation. What do you say, Umberto?
I love it.
This is the Psychology in Seattle podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist who practices in Seattle, and I'm also a professor who teaches in Seattle, and I'm also a podcaster who podcasts from Seattle. Who are you, Umberto?
My name is Humberto Castañeda, and I have a little factory for fidget spinners.
So this first email is from an anonymous person in Seattle. They say, just call me anonymous in Seattle. They have a question about the unified theory of Muppets. So I want to read this whole thing.
The what now? The unified theory of Muppets?
Yeah. So I want to read this whole thing, and then because I got to get through the whole thing, and then I'll open it up to your opinion about it, because I feel like it needs the full explanation.
Okay.
So the anonymous in Seattle person said, "Have you heard of the unified theory of Muppets?" So there's an article on Slate which describes it. And basically, you have Chaos Muppets and Order Muppets. So the Chaos Muppets are Cookie Monster, Ernie, Grover, Gonzo, Dr. Bunsen Honeydew, and Animal, obviously. The qualities of the Chaos Muppets are they're out of control, they're emotional, they're volatile. Then you have the Order Muppets. Like, do you know the Order Muppets?
Wait a minute. Where's Miss Piggy, or is there a third category?
Miss Piggy could be considered a Chaos Muppet, yeah.
Okay.
But she's not as chaos as...
Okay, I'm already finding a hole. Okay, obviously Kermit.
Right.
And Bert. Maybe the twins, the Swedish twins. So I forget what they're...
Swedish twins?
Yeah, like the... Mana, 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 mana,
yeah, I don't know. Scooter.
Which one's Scooter?
Scooter always had the clipboard and was coming up to Kermit and saying, you know.
Oh, and then the piano player, Ralph? What's his name?
Oh, the dog.
Yeah. Isn't it Ralph?
Yeah, he might be.
Yeah.
He might. I don't know where he fits in the spectrum.
What about that huge one, the blue one?
I don't know.
I forget his name.
Sam the Eagle.
No, that's the one I'm talking about. Sam the Eagle.
So these Muppets are neurotic. They're anxious. They're uptight. They're highly regimented. They're averse to surprises. They resent. They're responsible, but they kind of resent it. You know, Kermit and Bert and Scooter. They're not super happy that they have to control the Chaos Muppets, but they secretly revel in the knowledge that they keep the show going. You know, there's a certain superiority to Bert, Scooter, and Kermit. You know.
Yeah.
And your first grade, according to the Slate article, your first grade teacher was probably an Order Muppet. And Chief Justice John Roberts is probably an Order Muppet. So the article goes on to say, the key to a happy marriage, a well-functioning family, and a productive place of work lies in carefully calibrating the ratio of Chaos Muppets to Order Muppets within a closed system. This theory then the emailer goes on to say, this theory of the unified theory of Muppets has helped me understand a little bit about myself. I am an Order Muppet. I gravitate towards structure. But when I look at my life, I see a pattern of chaos. Despite my best intentions, for some reason, I just can't help but to cause chaos in my life in both little and big ways. But I very much want to be an Order Muppet. So, what do you think about this, Berto?
It's very, very funny. Yeah, I mean, clearly there were at least a couple types of Muppets, and if the idea is to try to apply it to humans, I feel like the thing that's missing from the cursory understanding that I have now about it is there were definitely people in the Muppets, characters in the Muppets that played a more central role and had aspects of both. Like, I think Miss Piggy is sort of one example. Like, she seems very neurotic, actually, but also causes chaos because of her demands and things like that. And then you have, like, what about the critics? The critics, you could call them orderly, but they don't seem neurotic at all. They just seem like they cause a different kind of chaos.
Yes. Well, I don't know if you're getting into this, but the thrust of this emailer is that it provides a way of looking at ourselves.
Yeah.
And like, are you a chaos Muppet or an order Muppet?
And I guess that's what I'm saying is like, I don't think you can put someone distinctly in one category, but especially not humans. And I have elements of chaos, and I have elements of order. Now, if you were going to say, am I more chaotic than orderly? Yeah, I'd imagine I am. But I'm certainly nowhere near as chaotic as, I don't know, I could imagine many characters that I know and or know from...
Well, what would make you more chaotic than orderly from where you are now? Well, so what percentage? Where are you on the percentage line?
I'm probably 60-40.
Okay. So what would make you 80-20?
So 80-20 would be like... I probably don't have a consistent job. I mean, maybe I'm more of a psychopath in a sense, right? I don't have a consistent job. I am probably moving quite often. My car is probably a POS with lots of stuff inside of it.
So what about you and me? How do we? Because the theory goes that at a place of work, which this is, you and me are at work, I guess. I've never really thought about it that way.
Yeah.
But you have to have a balance.
Right.
Now, the theory is, potentially not reflective of reality. But if we go with this, if we experiment with this model, if you're 60-40, then I have to be 60-40.
Sure. So I'm like slightly more Ernie, and you're slightly more Bert. Okay. Even though my name's Berto.
That's funny.
And I have thicker eyebrows.
And so, and my name is Kearney. And so, do you think that you're more chaos and I'm more order?
Yes, certainly.
On this podcast?
Yeah. Well, yeah, in general, yes. In the podcast as well, yeah.
In general?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think you're way more organized and less chaotic than I am.
But that's different, because me, separate from you, that's a different system.
Sure.
So
okay, sure. Just in the podcast, yes.
Yeah, because I would think that when we're in a social situation, the two of us need an order Muppet in contrast to you and me.
Yes, that's correct.
Because when we're socializing, the two of us are chaos Muppets.
That's totally fair. Yeah.
And without an order Muppet, like Carlos was an order Muppet,
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of who else would hang out with us. I don't know. Anyway.
Yeah.
Chong is sort of like, could be a chaos Muppet, but often was an order Muppet.
And as I'm thinking about this, there are different aspects to order and chaos depending on the context, right? Like, for example, I am a chaos Muppet when it comes to things like, am I going to be a little wacky or go talk to some strangers or things like that? But, I'm not the chaos Muppet that's going to start randomly doing drugs and stuff like that. So there's different aspects.
Right. I was thinking about this as I was prepping for this, which sounds funny that I was prepping for a conversation about Muppets, but at the 11th anniversary show, that was a few months ago, you and I, for those who weren't a part of it, Umberto and I were broadcasting on YouTube Live for 11 hours straight.
Yeah.
And we almost never took a break.
No.
We both ate snacks while we were broadcasting.
It's like really brief, like the bathroom break.
Just bathroom, yeah. We just take a break for the bathroom. And we would take turns. So if I had to go to the bathroom, Berto had full reins of the podcast. And so this was a good example of what you and I, the headspace we get into. So let me back up. This relates to systems theory. So if I'm going to make this into a psychological lecture, this is what I'm going to say, is that when you have a system, it tends to gravitate towards balance just naturally.
Like the Force. In
the same way that the climate of the world and all the things that relate to the climate, the temperature, so that the output, if you have the variable of temperature, the average temperature of the planet, up until the time when we started pumping out carbon into the atmosphere at an increased rate since Industrial Revolution, there was a careful balance between as the Earth got colder. So there's many different things that play into the climate, into the overall average temperature of the planet. But one element of that is that as the Earth got colder, like
the ice.
the ice forms, but it also starts to reflect, which creates more coldness.
Yeah.
But
then there's the gases that trap the reflecting off the ice, and then that actually heats the atmosphere back up a bit.
yeah, so you have all these things in balance. So you have the radioactivity in the core of the Earth that radiates heat from the core to the surface. You have heat being radiated off of the planet. You have heat coming in from the planet. You have a certain balance of carbon and greenhouse gases insulating the planet. You have cloud cover.
So which ones are the Chaos Muppets in this?
Well, neither. Everything is just it gravitates towards balance is the point. So, for example, if we continue to pump carbon into the atmosphere, and say somehow we slow it down, which is hopeful, but the carbon's up there and the temperature of the planet raises, eventually we'll probably, in all likelihood, reach some new equilibrium where the average temperature of the planet will be like 10 degrees hotter or something, but it'll balance out and it'll equalize.
Yeah, like for example, the system will kill off humans, and therefore the emissions will go down, and then the climate will stabilize.
Exactly. In the same way that our immune system, there's a balance. If the immune system is too strong, like anything that quote unquote boosts your immune system, you're just asking for terrible, terrible things like arthritis. And I'm not a biologist, but if you boost your immune system, it starts attacking your own body. Yeah. But you don't want a weak immune system. So there's a balance between you want the immune system to be strong, but not too strong.
Yeah.
Too strong, you end up suffering. Not strong enough, you end up suffering. There's a balance there, and so it's a system.
And maybe that's the idea, like in the Jedi stuff, in the Star Wars stuff, where when you have a light side that becomes too powerful, power corrupts. And if you have a dark side that becomes too powerful, power corrupts. But you need to be in balance with yourself and as a group.
Right. Okay. So all systems gravitate towards what systemic theorists called homeostasis, which is balance. Every cell in our bodies as a whole, our climate, organizations, this podcast. Okay. Yep. So, because this podcast has an output that we're trying to optimize, we're trying to stay stable. We're trying to stay. So there's a number of different things, and you chime in if you can think of anything too. We're trying to stay together. You and I don't want to fly apart.
Right.
We don't want to hate each other. We want to produce something that's interesting or useful to the listeners.
But it needs to be interesting. But meaning it can't be a flat line.
Can't be a flat line.
It's got to have someone going like this with their voice sometimes.
Right. It has to have spontaneity.
Yeah.
It has to have realness, but it can't be all spontaneous.
And it's got to be edgy in some ways, but not too edgy and always edgy. And
right. You don't want to be like, I don't know, Alex Jones or something like that, quote unquote, edgy. It has to stick to academia because people want that foundation. But if we strictly stick to that, so there's a lot of different things that need to output from your and I or our organization.
Like it's got to have Beatles and Star Wars, but if it's only Beatles and Star Wars.
Well, it's got to have John and Paul. It's got to have Luke and Anakin.
Wait, so
Reylo.
Who are the Chaos?
So, for example, Reylo, Rey and Kylo are an example of, anyway. But, so.
Who are the Chaos Beatles?
Well, in the end, Paul was the Order.
Yeah. Then John was Chaos.
Well, in essence, like the rest of them were kind of chaos, but particularly
Ringo
John.
was Order. So let's say John and George are chaos. Paul and Ringo are Order.
Right. Well, one could say, actually, so it's a good example. So the system of the Beatles, you and I know a lot about the history of the Beatles, at least what's been written and said about them. In the beginning, you had a stable system because you had John was in charge, and he had the energy to be in charge, and he was motivated to be in charge. He was the older Beatle. He was the more charismatic one. He was the quicker talker. He had more kind of a biting tongue. He knew how to put people in their place. But he was also very much in love with the Beatles in the beginning. He was very much in love with Paul in a lot of ways. And so he was, the balance in the Beatles was such that there was a lot of warmth and a lot of chaos, but there was also a lot of order.
And you could say that as a meta system, the four Beatles together were pretty chaotic, but then they got balanced out by George and Brian.
Right. So you put that 6-person system together, and there's enough order and there's enough chaos to keep it in balance. You need spontaneity, you need fun, but you also need to stick to a script. Otherwise, you'll never produce anything, or you'll end up saying bad things about Jesus and being banned in certain parts of the country. So you got to keep things in balance for the output to be optimized. And so after Brian dies, that threw it off. Too much chaos. And Paul tried to step into the Brian role, but he's just another Beatle. So John's not going to look up to Paul.
Right.
He looked up to Brian in a certain way. He also abused Brian, according to some reports, but he looked up to Brian as sort of like a pseudo father. But John wasn't going to look. So the balance of, there wasn't enough order, and that was very clear at the end of the Beatles. I mean, they ended up looking for order by hiring some shyster from the United States, some lawyer or band manager that fleeced all their money, and it was. And they started investing in really stupid things like the Apple Store and all these like real experimental bullshitty things, and lost a lot of money and blah, blah, blah. And so that's a good example of like, but it's a hard thing to predict. It's a hard thing to write a formula for, of just like, okay, how much order is needed and how much chaos is needed. It's a magical formula that just sort of is created. One could argue that this podcast is like that. So getting back to you and me. So clearly you're the chaos Muppet and I'm the order Muppet.
Right.
Not that I don't have chaos. I'm not like a eagle, or what's his name? Sam the Eagle.
Sam the Eagle.
And you're not an animal. You know what I mean? But one could say that I'm a Kermit, and you're a Grover. You're not a Cookie Monster. You're not a cookie. Cookie Monster and animal. They're real. They're all chaos.
Yeah.
But you could say you're either an Ernie or a Grover or a Gonzo, and you could say that I'm like a Bert or a Kermit. Anyway, so as an example.
Sorry, but I think it's important that you, and in fact you did this, which. Just a little bit ago, is it's important to contextualize it to a specific dynamic structure, because I think what I was reacting a little bit initially was the idea that me as a person, I am a chaos puppet, period.
Right.
As opposed to like, in this context, I'm a little bit of this. In this context, I'm a little bit of that.
Great. So that's systemic theory, is that we are not individuals. We are a product of our system. So I don't know about you, but for me, well, I could speculate for you, but for me, I'm an order Muppet on this podcast. I'm an order Muppet when I'm a professor, even more so. In fact, some students will listen to the podcast, and at my university, they'll be like, I was so intimidated by you until I listened to your podcast, and I realized, that, and they go ... and I'll insert, and I'll be like, I'm a douchebag like anyone else, and they're like, yeah, I guess so.
You're a little bit of chaos Muppet.
Right. I don't say things like bag of dicks at the university, so I'm, definitely more of an order Muppet at my university, because that's what the system calls for. There's too much chaos. The students aren't chaos Muppets, but there's too much chaos, and there's a strong need for leadership as a professor.
Right.
You could say that the chaos is present in the fact that the students are insecure, they don't know what they're doing, and they don't know how the system works. They don't even know how to be a therapist yet. There's a lot of disorder, and they need me to order it all.
So as an example, today I was listening to a story from Mike Tyson when he was training with this one guy, famous trainer, I forget his name, but the trainer was telling the story. Now, Mike Tyson, I don't know how much you remember, but like he had a a work ethic like nobody's business. Like he worked hard. He was up at 4 a.m. running, like all this stuff, right? Yeah. So to think of him as a chaos Muppet in that sense would be kind of silly. But certainly a lot of his antics, especially later, you could imagine, oh, that's kind of chaos Muppet. But in this case,
biting Holofield's ear
that's
off.
extreme animal behavior, right? The Muppet animal. It
was Holofield, right?
Yeah, Evander Holyfield. Holyfield, yeah. But the trainer was talking about this one time where Mike Tyson was punching, and then I forget what happened, but like he turned around for a bit, sort of taking a mini break, and Mike Tyson took off his gloves and his like the wrappings, and then the trainer turns around, he's like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "Well, I'm done." It's like, and then the trainer knew, it's like, I can't let him be in charge. I need to be the order Muppet. It's like, even though technically he's already worked his ass off. And so he's like, no, you're not done. It's like, well, I already took off my thing. Fine, we're going barefisted. And like he had him go barefisted and his knuckles were bleeding and all this stuff.
So the trainer, according to his own experience or intuition or a combination, intuited in that moment that in order for us to have an outcome, an output of this system where you, Mike Tyson, are the best you can be and are trained well enough for the next fight, you cannot, the Mike Tyson introduces a chaos based on his own emotions of he's tired and he's done and he's bushed and he doesn't want to do it anymore. And without order, like, Brian Epstein saying, you're going to go back on, get the next single out,
put on the monkey suits.
It's not like the Beatles didn't want to. It's not like Mike Tyson didn't want to win.
Right.
But the chaos of his own emotions, that's the chaos. And so that's the important thing to think when you're thinking systemically. It requires a certain layered thinking to what elements you focus on in the system. Yeah. That we're not, it's not that Mike Tyson is a chaos Muppet, is that Mike Tyson's tiredness and his emotions and his own susceptibility to his emotions is the chaos Muppet. Right. Overall, Mike Tyson could be characterized as an order Muppet because he works really hard, but his emotions he has an animal and a Cookie Monster inside of him that he cannot provide the order Muppet over so that the output of the system is optimized. So in other context, and also another order Muppet context that I'm an order Muppet in is organizing parties.
Yeah.
I'll just admit this, I'm one of the best party organizers.
Your parties are amazing.
Well, whether they're amazing or not, I pull them off.
Right.
And there's hardly anyone else who can compete with I have organized all of my high school reunions, of which there's been 3. I've organized several family reunions in which like 100 people show up, and there's like games and banquets and awards and videos and lots of things. I organize all the big parties that you're a part of.
Right.
I'm organizing my own birthday party in a couple weeks.
So you have those contexts in which you're an order Muppet.
Right. In others, I'm a chaos Muppet. Like in my marriage with my wife, I am the chaos Muppet. Stacy is the order Muppet. Like we were in Mexico last month and we're on the beach and I see jet skis or ski-doos or whatever you call them. And I'm like, oh, we're getting on those things. And Stacy's like, oh, I don't know. And I'm like, come on. Now, I've only ridden one of those things once in my life, and I was in high school. So we're talking 30 years ago was the only time I've ever ridden on one. And it was in Lakes, Washington in Seattle, which is extremely calm waters.
Yeah, that's not a 5... what is the rapids called? The 5...
I don't know. Yeah, something.
Level 5 rapids or something.
This is the Pacific Ocean in the afternoon in Mexico, in Puerto Vallarta, where you have pretty high swells.
Oh, wow.
And especially right as close to the shore, people are surfing. So I have to navigate this thing like beyond the surf.
And it's a what is it?
Well, I think they call them ski-doos, but they're essentially jet skis you have to stand up in,
right?
And these ones you sit down
and there's power.
It's essentially like a snowmobile.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, we're getting on that thing. Now, why do I think this is going to work out? I don't, but I'm like, the thing is that, and Stacy's going to be the order Muppet. Now, if Stacy wasn't there with me, I would have had a different reaction.
Yeah, right.
If for example, I was with a bigger Chaos Muppet than me around these watercraft, I might have been like, well, let's think about this for a second.
Yeah.
I probably still would have done it, but I would have been a lot more hesitant. In that space, in the system that was me and Stacy, I was 110% on board.
Right.
Why? Because I knew in my unconscious, based on my systemic understanding of the history of our relationship, that she was going to point out the unsafety issues.
I see.
I also knew that if it was so unsafe that it was probably not a good idea, she would actually put a kibosh on it. She'd be like, this is a no can do deal.
So that was your fallback.
Unconsciously.
Yeah.
I know I can go 110% into this depending on her, based on her history, based on our system that we've developed, our homeostasis, that if there's enough red flags, she will pull the plug. But she didn't. So we get on the thing and I immediately start gunning it. Looking back, it's like, why?
Why?
Like we could have died, out there in the Pacific Ocean. Why? Because I knew she would tell me to slow down. This isn't conscious, this isn't conscious. Now, she, from her perspective, there's a part of her that wants to have fun.
Yeah.
She had a great time on that, whether she can admit it or not. She had a great time. But she knows that I will drag her on a lot of things like that.
And you guys were only in the hospital for 2 days or something.
Yeah. So in my marriage, in certain aspects, I'm definitely the Chaos Muppet, and I'm not the Order Muppet. With some friends in some contexts, I'm the Chaos Muppet. Now,
hey, like for example, like you and I, we don't go out too much anymore. But when we used to go out, we used to trade off. Like sometimes I would be more Chaos, I was gonna say monkey Muppet, and you were more Chaos Muppet. And like I remember you getting pizza like at all hours of the night after going out, and I'm like, why are you eating pizza right now?
Yeah, right.
And I'm hungry.
Yeah, I was literally Cookie Monster for pizza.
Yeah.
At 4 a.m. in Vancouver, BC.
And I'm like, why are you getting pizza?
Well, the thing is that what's beautiful about Vancouver, BC, in contrast to Seattle, is that on downtown Vancouver is concentrated. It's like they have Ballard, Capitol Hill, Pioneer Square. In Seattle, you have all these little neighborhoods that are wonderful, but they're unique to that neighborhood.
And you got to travel by at least an Uber to get there.
Yeah, it's like a half-hour Uber drive to get from each little node. Whereas in Vancouver, although you have, Kitsilano and West Van and stuff, but, the Robson...
there's that one area that's packed.
Yeah, it's like for blocks and blocks. And the thing about that neighborhood, because our hotel was in the neighborhood, is that there's a pizza joint and a shawarma joint open at every other corner.
Everywhere. Not to mention a few Japanesey, or not just Japanese, but like there's I don't know if those are open late, but there were definitely
izakaya places.
Yeah, stuff like that.
Open till 6 in the morning, and it's just like, whereas in Seattle, you gotta where's that hot dog place again? Anyway, so I was the cat. Anyway. So getting back to the show, at our 11th, so we've developed this homeostasis, where I prepare for the episodes. I do all this background. I have an outline I follow. I'm thinking about you're not thinking about the time. Like if I never say, okay, that's the end of the episode,
we keep going.
We would be just
11 hours every day.
Like that soccer player rolling into the infinity. You and I would just be, because that's not your headspace. Because why? Because I'm going to do it.
Right. If I did, that's a good point. If I didn't, I'd have to. In fact, there are those times where I have a constraint. And so in those moments, I have to be like, okay, I can only do 10 more minutes or something.
But I'm the one who actually dictates that. Like you'll tell me 10 more minutes, but you won't go like, we have to stop.
Right.
I'm the one that actually will stop it.
Right.
Because that's my job. I'm the order Muppet. In the same way that the roles are reversed with my wife. Okay. So during the 11th anniversary show, there were times when you had to go to the bathroom.
Yeah.
And when I went to the bathroom. Because you're in a headspace of chaos,
We would go into the stratosphere.
the episode would completely go off. I didn't know what happened. Stacy was sitting here silently, and afterwards or the next day, she said, "Do you have any idea what Umberto was talking about when you were in the bathroom?" And I'd be like, "No, what?" I thought, because I would come back into the room and you would kind of play up that you were at the end of some. Stacy told me that you were telling this, like, these chapters of a spontaneous made-up story.
Yes.
That made no sense to the listeners. Like, no offense. But,
No, I know.
But she said people were commenting
abstract.
on YouTube Live, what the hell is Umberto talking about? So you were so spontaneous and so non-orderly that it became unlistenable.
Right.
Okay, you leave and go to the bathroom. And now I remember this because I was sitting here.
Yeah.
I remember the wind would just completely came out of my sails.
Oh.
And I sat here and I was just like, and I was, I'm looking at the same notes.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, I'll just continue going down my notes.
Yeah.
And the 98% of the compelling nature of the
Right.
broadcast was lost
Right.
without the element that you bring, which is the cat. Now, because I'm all order, I'm looking
Yeah.
at my notes.
Yeah.
Now, if you and I were doing a different style of podcast or
Or on days where, like, if you're doing an episode by yourself,
Right.
You can't subconsciously be like, well, Berto's going to be here to add fun elements.
Right.
Like, you got to keep it interesting in your own way. I'm sure if I was doing an episode by myself or when I've recorded my videos, like, I can't be just like all wacky all the time because
Right.
that's not a thing.
So you and I, over 11 years, have developed a understanding unconsciously of how this system between you and I works. Call it chemistry, call it intuition, call it relationship,
Call it karma.
whatever. But it's how we all step into and develop a systemic homeostasis.
Yeah.
That was exhibited by the fact that when one of us would leave, the podcast would the output would completely suffer.
Right.
It would either be too orderly or too chaotic.
Yeah.
And with the balance comes something good, and without that comes something bad. So when we're talking about, think out there for yourself. Everyone think about in podcast land, not are you a order Muppet or a chaos Muppet,
Right.
but in what contexts are you an order Muppet or a chaos Muppet? What's the output of that system that's necessary? So with a friend of yours, you end up being kind of the order Muppet while your friend gets drunk and is the chaos Muppet. That's because the two of you have developed that system, or you and your spouse,
Right.
you're the spontaneous, Ernie, and your husband is the stodgy Bert. The problems arise when systems, and this is well sort of philosophized in family systems theory, of which is the primary theory that we teach in my program, is that when the roles become rigid. So for example, in our relationship, if I could not appreciate spontaneity,
Right.
or if I couldn't be spontaneous, or if I never said things like bag of dicks,
Right.
or if I chastised you for being chaotic, that would be me being, in this context, too rigid,
right.
to the role.
Right.
For you, if you never allowed me to order the podcast, like right now you're sort of deferring to my line of thinking.
Mouse, napkin, table.
Instead of saying random things, and so if you were like, I'm going to be chaotic and I'm going to say silly things
Right.
all the time, regardless of what the situation calls for and what the system is trying to do.
Yeah.
Another unhealthy thing that will develop in marriages and families and places of work is if to think about is people's needs. So you have needs, I have needs.
Right.
The listeners have needs. That's our system. Because the listeners are a sort of amorphous element of this system.
Yeah.
Because if you and I were just talking alone without recording, we wouldn't be talking this way.
No.
So they're a part of the system. So everyone has needs that, we've identified the listener's needs because we've referred to that as output, but you could almost consider it sort of swirling input. But you and I have needs too. We're emotional creatures. We have needs.
Right.
We have needs to be respected. We have needs to be heard. We have needs to be seen as not like idiots. We have needs to make fools out of ourselves.
That sounds stupid.
We have needs to have fun. We have needs, and so, and those needs are probably pretty similar.
Right.
If we become so beholden to the roles, and we ignore and we don't allow flexibility in the moment to pay attention to the broader purpose of this system, which is to meet all of our emotional needs. We're trying to meet the listeners' quote unquote emotional needs. Giving information meets some sort of emotional need that they have.
Right.
In essence, you have emotional needs. I have emotional needs, and the way the system works, because it has been working for 11 years, correct me if I'm wrong, in a good way.
At least for 10 and a half of them.
Yeah, right. That you and I must be paying attention, consciously or unconsciously, intuitively, non-intuitively, to each other's emotional needs.
Right.
We pick up on that. We pick up like where is, through empathy, where is Umberto emotionally? What does he need right now?
And early on, maybe even not that early on, but like at least for the first couple of years, I think we were developing the empathy for the listener in that sense,
because we didn't have listeners,
right,
and we're figuring out, right. And that's one way you could look at how the podcast evolved into a better product, because we over time slowly heard things from them and took it into account. And so when you people out there on podcast land are thinking about the systems you're in, the marriage, your relationships, your friendships, your workplace, your families, another part to think about is, does the system and the way the system works out, whether it's order or chaos, is it facilitating the meeting of everyone's needs? Mm-hmm. Is there too much rigidity to the role of chaos or order that disallows needs to be met?
And maybe even, are you having to do it all? Like, one thing that's coming to mind is, I'm thinking of George Lucas doing episodes 1, 2, 3, especially 1. Like in some ways, he became a band of one. I mean, sure, he had all these people, but he was kind of like the ultimate say-so for everything. And so maybe he was trying to have to be both chaos and order. Like chaos, like my script is late, but no one's there to tell him, turn it in anyways. And so he's probably like, well, I guess I should turn it in, but it's not ready. And like maybe that kind of dynamic, when you're trying to do both sides of the coin at all times, can be problematic.
That's interesting to think about. So let's sort of walk ourselves, again, we don't really know that much, but I think we know enough to speculate, is that when episode 4, A New Hope, the very first Star Wars movie came out, George Lucas was poor. He wasn't like super poor, but he could have been destroyed. He could have been ruined financially if Star Wars didn't do well, because didn't he finance it a lot himself?
In my understanding, yeah.
Yeah. He had done American Graffiti and had some success financially, but anyway, so he had a lot of order and chaos in him. Right. But maybe a broader way to look at it is that he had time constraints, he had money constraints, and he had producers who were pushing him, and he was pushing back.
And he wasn't the George Lucas who who has created 3 Star Wars movies that grossed $1 billion.
Right. So the system had an output of try to make the best movie possible. Mm-hmm. And George Lucas was so overwhelmed that he almost died. He had to go to a hospital because he was so stressed. His blood pressure was through the roof and everything. Well, he needed to collaborate a lot. Mm-hmm. He had sound guys and script people and friends who, like Francis Ford Coppola and Brian De Palma and others and Steven Spielberg. People who he was unsure of himself, so the system included a lot more people. Yeah, and
people that had valuable and valid input into the system, not just dismissible opinions.
Right. So the the roles, I mean, George Lucas was still in charge.
Yeah.
But the roles were flexible because at times George Lucas would be like, well, I don't know what I'm doing really right now.
I've never done a Star Wars.
Right. So the system was more, there was more openness between the elements of the system because no one really knew what they were doing and they needed to depend on each other. And if anything, you could say that there wasn't enough leadership really, and it almost fell apart because of that. Anyway, so you fast forward to the prequels, episodes 1 through 3. Now, George Lucas is considered a genius. Because think about after episode 6.
Yeah.
He hadn't really fucked up yet, right?
No. The most was, the small percentage of people annoyed by the Ewoks. That was about it.
But that was pretty small.
Yeah.
He was considered a genius. It was considered the best movie trilogy of all time. It grossed millions, billions of dollars. He started the CG, the electric or the light or whatever.
Oh yeah, ILM, Industrial Light and Magic.
Yeah, Skywalker Ranch, that whole thing. And he now has tons of confidence. He has a ton of people following him.
Unlimited money in a sense.
Yeah, and no dependence on Spielberg and these other people to help him because he has all the confidence in the world. Why wouldn't he have all the confidence in the world? And given that completely new system, a totally different product was produced because you could say that in episodes, the original trilogy, Lucas was still very much concerned about the viewer. There was a lot of talk about like, oh God, is anyone going to like this thing? He was very concerned about that because if the viewer didn't like it, he wasn't going to be in the film industry anymore. Like it was going to be the end of his career. With the prequels, he knew, I'm sure, he could bomb at least episode 1 and still be a billionaire.
Yeah, exactly.
And he already has the legacy of creating Star Wars.
Yeah.
So, he doesn't really have anything to lose.
Right.
And so a totally different system, different hierarchy, different noticing of the elements.
And by the way, there's clearly some aspects about George Lucas that seem very orderly, maybe not his ability to deliver scripts on time. But if you look at episode 1, it's a very ordered movie. You know what I mean? Like it's just everything. It's very clean looking. The set looks clean. The effects look clean. The story is pretty straightforward. It's very clean.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel chaotic enough in a weird way.
Yeah. So because of the system now, so George Lucas is the same guy he was,
right?
Personality wise, same, essential brain, but the system of A New Hope was completely different than whatever Phantom Menace.
Phantom Menace, yeah.
And that's why you had a completely different output. And that's the thing, but we as linear individualistic thinkers, we tend to go like, well, George Lucas must have always been an idiot, because it's like, how do we reconcile the fact that 4, 5, and 6 are genius movies, and 1, 2, and 3 are ridiculous? Yeah. How do we explain that?
Oh, he must have always been an idiot, and we just got fooled or something.
Right. We were like, what happened? Or when you get rich, you like, what are the narratives?
Right. Or when you have the band that you love their first album and then they put out their second album.
But what are the narratives that explain why episodes 1 through 3 were terrible?
Because he was just solely in control and he had all the veto power on all the decisions.
That's what people say?
That's what people say. And then there's this documentary of the making of.
Yeah.
And I will say it does seem that way because like everyone around him is kind of like, very shy to say they disagree or.
So good. So that's essentially a systemic way of looking at it.
Yeah.
That if the system for episodes 1 through and 3 was such that there was more openness, an exchange of ideas and power between George Lucas and his team, that it would have been a much better product.
And I would add that, you know how you were saying that our listeners are part of the system for us, right? I do remember also in that documentary and interviews and stuff, I did get the sense like he was discounting the existing fans as part of that system to a great extent. You know, like, well, I'm not making this for like, you know, I'm making this for the new kids, like that kind of thing, which is fine, right? He is entitled. It is his IP. But he was in a potentially either discounting or not counting enough that the existing fans were part of that system as well.
Right. And, you know, that seemed to have worked because there's a lot of young people who really love episode 1 through 3.
Yeah.
And they're like, I don't know why
And
everyone...
they had no context anyways.
Right, because they saw it when they were 7 and it was great to
It was
them.
fun.
Anyway, let's take a break, and when we get back, let's answer more emails. What do you say?
Let's do it.
So, Berto, if a Muppet were to ask the listeners to become a patron, what would they sound like?
Oh, hello. We're about to start the second part of the show, but if you could become a patron right now. Oh, what is that over there? Oh my gosh, the sun is falling. All right, quickly become a patron because I don't know if we're going to be here much longer.
That was good. It was like a scooter.
Yeah.
Also a little bit of Morty in there.
Yeah, it is a little Morty-ish.
All right, so patron Junie. Well, before moving on, we have our 1000th episode coming up, December 12th.
Woo!
At 4 o'clock, Thursday, Seattle time, 4 o'clock.
That's crazy.
We're going to be going for 3 or 4 hours, and we're going to maybe try to actually have call-ins.
Ooh.
So,
as in call-in?
Yeah.
Call-in?
And so join us for that. It's going to be our 1000th episode on YouTube Live.
Wow.
And also, if you become a $10 or up patron between now and then, 2019, December 12th, you will get a signed card from me and Berto.
Nice.
A special 1000th episode card.
That is crazy.
Which Stacy is currently designing.
Woo!
If you become a mug level person between now and the 1000th episode, you'll get a mug, but you also get a pin, and you also get a signed card. We have these special pins that are real satisfying, and it says, because you deserve it. Also, we have 2 scholarships that we're giving out to deserving people. The deadline for the scholarship applications is December 31st, 2019. Go to our website, fill out the application. We've already had some applications.
Don't procrastinate.
We have because patrons donate their money to the podcast, we always give a portion of that money towards various charities that we support. One of which that a lot of the listeners really appreciate that we do this is we give a scholarship,
right?
And to a mental health student, and we've already given away thousands of dollars to students, and so we're offering more scholarships. We're offering one $2,000 one. An anonymous patron actually gave us $2,000 to offer a second scholarship.
It's insane.
This round, and so we're giving away $4,000 to mental health students. So go to the website and apply now if you're a mental health student. Review us on iTunes because I think that's a thing.
Yeah.
So you have an iPhone, right?
I do.
Can you leave an iTunes review on your phone? Can you know?
Well, probably. I've never done it.
Well, anyway,
I do App Store reviews.
So there's got to be a way. Like, I don't know how to do it personally. I used to back when I used to have physical iTunes on my computer, which I don't anymore. Also, like our Facebook page, our official Facebook page, because that's where all of our major announcements are, and I post pictures of my cats and my new dog, Obi-Wan Kenobi. If you want to see pictures of my cats and my dog, then like the Facebook page, and also Instagram. Follow us on Instagram. We post more on Facebook than Instagram, but we still post on Instagram. Also, if you want to contact us, email us at go to our website and click on the Contact Us page. That's the best way to contact us, because otherwise it's hard for me to get the message, and it's also hard for me to respond. Anyway, Patron Junie, go to Patron Junie. wrote in and said, after watching a horror movie, I go for weeks struggling to sleep because my imagination is out of control. I freak out about killers even though I know it's completely irrational. Also, the lasting negative effects of horror movies never affected me during the day. Oh, I get it. So she watches a horror movie.
Yeah.
She has anxiety for weeks after, but only at night, not during the day.
Interesting.
Berto, what do you think?
Well, that's fascinating. I mean, I remember feeling that way when I was young about certain things I watched, but as someone who loves horror movies, I'm not usually affected in that way. I will say that there are a couple of things that I cannot handle well. If there's movies, and some of the older movies did tend to do this, which is abhorrent, where they actually harm creatures, like even if it's mice and stuff like that, that really, I can't handle that. And that's actually mini traumatized me in the past. But when it's like, when it's normal CG or just like fake stuff, like it's really hard for me to feel feel scared about it. There are certain ghost things that I've watched, especially when I was a bit younger, where I thought it was fine, and then like I left the theater and it was like one of those midnight showings, whatever. I left the theater and I went to get in my car, and it was creepy, but it definitely didn't haunt me for weeks and weeks. So I wonder if maybe I don't know if this patron watches with other people, or do they live alone, because that all could influence those scary feelings. And maybe they shouldn't watch these scary movies if they're affecting them so negatively.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Junie probably doesn't watch them very often.
Yeah.
At least hopefully, given the effects it has on her. Yeah. So there's not a lot of research on this. So, and if there was, it'd be hard to lock down exactly what we're talking about here. But if I was to speculate on the factors as to why, because like, for example, my wife, Stacy, she can't even watch the trailers of those movies. She's like, when we're at a movie theater and we're forced to watch, like what movie did we see recently where for whatever reason the movie was associated with horror, and so there are horror movies. Anyway, I can't remember, but
yeah,
she never watches any horror movies, not even close. Like she to this day will yell at me, not seriously, but kind of seriously, about convincing her to see that The House in the Woods.
Oh, The Cabin in the Woods.
Cabin in the Woods.
Yeah.
Like that movie is a comedy.
Yeah.
And it's a joke about horror movies.
It's very meta.
Right. So for those of you who haven't seen it, it's like all the horror movies in the past, what's his face, who directed and wrote it? God, the guy who does all the touch-ups for the MCU movies.
Yeah.
And anyway, that guy, he decided to write
Josh.
He did Buffy the Vampire, and anyway, Slayer. So he does all the. He took all the horror movies of the past and basically just did a send-up, sort of a parody of those movies, but also making a movie that was interesting to watch. And as I'm watching it, I'm like, oh, I get it. They're doing a riff on that sort of style of horror movie, and oh, I get it. Now we're going into like Alien and blah,
which
blah,
definitely
blah.
makes it not feel scary, but that's okay because the whole point is to enjoy all those references.
Right, but he makes it scary enough that it's not like a joke. It's not like a complete joke. It's like there's a plot, and you're kind of pulling for the characters. Anyway. I was like, Stacy, we got to go see this movie, and I think a bunch of other people were going too. And she's like, oh, it's a horror movie. I can't go. And I was like, no, it's not a horror movie. It's like a parody of a horror movie. Right. So you should be fine. And she was like, but I don't think you understand. I hate horror movies. Like I can't watch them. I was like, no, you don't get it. It's supposed to be a joke. It's supposed to be. It's a comedy.
Trust me.
It's a comedy. Well, we go, and she has nightmares for weeks after. And this was like 8 years ago?
And that's the worst case scenario because she warned you.
And she says to this day, you dragged me to that one Cabin in the Woods movie.
Oh, my gosh.
But I was being honest, and I obviously didn't understand the level.
Right, you weren't like wink, wink. Like you literally felt that way, and it's fair. Like,
right, because I don't like certain movies that have a lot of jump scares, or
you're not really a horror movie person.
No. One, I just don't like the style of storytelling because the story often involves basically some kind of comedic spirit who just likes to
Mess with people.
slowly mess with people and then kill them, and has basically complete control of reality.
Right.
It's like it's not an interesting plot. It's just like you have this jokester god who can do anything. I mean, even movies like Friday the 13th. I mean, this creature is basically a god.
Right.
You're walking around,
but he walks slowly.
You're walking around in a world where Thor decides to kill humans. It's like there's no contest.
Sounds pretty interesting.
There's no, like there's nothing you can do. If Black Panther is going to kill you.
Hey, I thought you liked The Boys.
What?
Don't you like The Boys, the series?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. See.
So.
But anyways, right. So
there's some people in this world who, for whatever reason, like Junie, will watch a horror movie and it'll rock them, whereas other people, no effect really.
Right.
Like it's just like they'll be scared, they'll be their heart's racing while they're watching the movie, but they're not like traumatized.
Right.
So we're both watching the same thing. Why would two different people react differently? So here's my speculation, because I haven't seen the research, if there is any. If you have past trauma that is triggered for whatever reason by these horror movies, then that's going to make it more damaging and more arousing and more fight or flight reaction, more traumatic. So, for example, if you have been victimized sexually, or if someone has overpowered you physically and abused you and scared you, watching a horror movie is potentially going to trigger that, because you're watching often a villain who, in essence, is similar to, say, an uncle who beats you or forces you to have sex, or a rapist who jumps out of the bushes. Like
you feel that powerlessness,
the boogeyman kind of thing. Yeah. If you're prone to anxiety, so if you're generally prone to anxiety, which you are, Berto,
right?
But for whatever reason, watching these movies doesn't trigger that. But I think that has to do with it too. I think if you generally are prone to fight or flight reactions anyway, I think that's another factor. A big one, though, is not being habituated to this form of art.
Fair enough. Right.
For example, if you show, like I come from a world of, in terms of the spectrum of the planet, of extreme sex positivity.
Right.
In that I am accustomed to talking about sex with friends, my wife, clients, students, and I'll just be like I was talking to a supervisee the other day, and I'm like, and she was presenting a case, and I was like, so it was giving me clues that maybe what the client was suffering from potentially was erectile dysfunction. I'm used, I've talked about these topics for decades. It's like talking about anxiety, erectile dysfunction.
So these things don't like shock you, offend you.
Yeah, they don't. There's no visceral reaction.
Right.
I'm habituated to it. Other people are not. That's why whenever you do these sex ed classes, you do that. When I used to teach kids sex ed, we would always play this game called the penis game, where everyone would yell penis at the beginning just to get it out.
Right.
Because, there's all this tension.
You got to get the penis out.
Right. So all the class, okay, 1, 2, 3, penis, and the classes next door would be like, what are they doing? But we're yelling this penis. Part of that is to get that energy out.
Right.
It's also an icebreaker, if you will, but it also habituates all of us to saying the word penis. Right. We're going to be talking in sex ed about penises and vaginas and clitorises and testicles and balls and and breasts and boobs and anuses, pubic hair. We're going to be saying a lot of things that we usually relegate to the locker room, and we don't talk about in polite society, and so we're not habituated to such things. So if you're not habituated to horror movie images, and you're watching one for the first time in 10 years.
Jeez, yeah.
It's going to be a lot harder
with modern effects and all the gore that they put in them, and
it's going to be a lot more bigger, especially if you're prone to anxiety and have this past trauma.
It's like in my case, I've been watching horror stuff since I was a kid. And not only watching, I used to like Edgar Allan Poe stories and like scary stories. I used to love them as a kid. So I had been getting habituated, forever.
Right. Yeah. So I think that's another factor that I don't have listed here is an appreciation for the art form.
Right.
So if you're like my wife enduring this kind of art and you're just sitting there going, I hate this, I don't like this movie,
right.
and then you're being shocked, it's like it's all bad and no reason to sit through it. Whereas for you, when you were younger and maybe more susceptible to the shock of it, you liked the art form and you're like, well, I want to get through this,
right.
and I want to be here because I like this art form.
And I wonder too if there was actually something. This might be interesting because I lived in a kind of chaotic world in Bogota, not both personally with my family and also what was happening around us in the politics and in the violence and stuff. I do wonder if there was a little bit of like, oh, that feels like home kind of thing, in a weird, perverse way.
And a level of control over it because it's in this make-believe world that's on screen. It's not real.
Yeah.
And so it helped you to just fantasize that you could control the chaos in your regular life.
I wonder if that's why the other thing that was very popular in the 80s in some aspects of the Colombian community for kids was death metal.
Oh.
There were a lot of pockets. I love death metal. I would go to sleep every Sunday night listening to death metal.
Yeah, you've talked about how when you were a kid you would listen to death metal, but I didn't realize it was a Bogota thing.
It wasn't just Bogota. There were pockets throughout Colombia of like death metal fans. Like,
that's weird.
Yeah, but maybe it's similar because like death metal is scary and intense and very adrenaline filled, but it's safe. Like you control it. It's interesting.
Also, I think that if people have, this is just speculation, if you have above average empathy or above average noticing or paying attention to people's feelings or the lives of other people, then you're going to be more affected by horror movies. Like there's some people who can't watch the news very well because there's often a lot of depiction of war or strife or famine or something. And for some people, because I watch these people and they have so much heartbreak, for what's happening. Or like a commercial that shows puppies who are suffering, and
for
give money.
$2 a day.
Yeah.
You could feed this puppy.
Like for some people, I think they just generally have those, whatever it is, whether you call it empathy or susceptibility to imagery or influence, it just goes right to the heart for them, and it's so painful. And I think those people, when they watch the horror movies, they can't separate themselves very easily from the images, and it gets to them viscerally in their body. You want that in a horror movie, but you don't want that too much.
I will say I can actually relate to that even myself, because when I was younger, I sort of prided myself, me and my friend Ron, we sort of prided ourselves in that like nothing could shock us. He was even worse than me. Like, do you remember those Faces of Death VHS tapes in the late 80s, early 90s?
I remember rumors of them, but I never saw them because I knew that it would terrify me, or not terrify me, but it would not be good for my mental health.
Right. So like Ron and some of my other friends watched them. I actually never could get myself to watch them. I didn't want to. Whether or not I thought they were real or not, I was like, I just can't, right? But when it came to horror movies, I don't remember, like when I was in my 20s, I don't remember ever thinking while I'm watching a horror movie, oh my God, but what if that was a real person or something like that. But as I got to be older, like late 30s and then in my 40s, I definitely had way more of those moments where I start getting like, ooh, but some of this violence does happen. What if that was a real person? Like those kind of things. And that does, I wouldn't say it takes me out completely, but it threatens to take me out of the suspension.
That brings to mind another factor that I think is definitely true with my wife, is that she generally worries more about the kinds of things that the news makes us afraid of, like school shootings or being killed by a homeless person or something. You know, she has a lot more fear around that, and I think that contributes to our relegated roles of chaos and order. A lot of times, is, you know, we'll be walking down a sketchy street in Seattle, and she'll just be like, "We should not be walking down this street," and I'll be like, "It's fine," but she inherently just has a lot more concern. You know, in her mind, it's a lot more likely to be killed by a man with a hatchet than for me. For me, I'm just like, I'm much more likely to get run over by a motorcycle,
Right.
or to have heart disease or a stroke.
So if you watch the Stephen King, what's the car one? The
Cujo or Christine.
Christine, is it? No, the one where the car follow, like the guy's driving on the freeway. Duel. That one probably freaks you out the most because you could actually get run over by a car.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, that's no joke. I remember watching that when I was young, and I remember that really getting to me because I think all of us can relate to, you're on the freeway and a giant truck is right next to you.
Yeah.
It just feels
it's scary.
It's concerning. Yeah.
And similar to that. So not only because it was such an amazingly well-made movie, but The Omen, when I was a kid, that one really did freak me out. And I wouldn't say it traumatized me, but I was fairly obsessed with it for a long time, because the thing is, I was a Catholic boy in Colombia where it's fairly superstitious already. And we had just been like reading the Bible in class and stuff. And even though we weren't reading Revelation, when I saw the movie, all the kids at school, because I think they played it on TV. You know how those things happen, right? And so we were all talking about it, and they're like, well, actually, it does say that. And then we're all reading the passages, and it freaked me out, man.
Right. Same with The Exorcist. If you believe that this sort of thing could happen, it's like a reality TV show, this thing. So I think that that's another factor is that if you generally believe that it's possible to have someone like Jason stalk you and kill you, maybe even because you've had someone stalk you in the past, or it's just you're just more generally anxious about that news story propaganda, then I think that's another factor that is going to. And I think one of the, if we did a gender study, I'm quite positive that many more men, male-identified people, will say that they are fans of horror movies than women are, right?
Could be, yeah.
I mean, I think that's a fair assumption, right?
I would
plenty of women like horror movies for sure.
I would go along with that assumption.
Right. So, and women are more likely to be targeted and or have good reason to be worried about being targeted.
Right. And traditionally, the victims in the horror movies, or at least, how should I say this? The heroines a lot of times are females, but they're the ones that are under the most psychological duress because they're being chased the whole movie.
Right.
And that's a trope that was very, very common.
Also, another reason that I think that some people suffer, the last one that I'll say, just speculation as to why the Junies and the Stacys of the world and then the Emberos of the world, is a lack of certain cognitive skills. For some people, they lack certain skills, which is natural because a lot of people aren't taught them, or it doesn't come to them naturally, how to fall asleep when you have something that's concerning you.
Oh, yeah.
So a lot of people, they'll say, I can't sleep at night. And I'll be like, why? And at least half will say something to the effect of, well, I turn off the lights and my head hits the pillow and my mind's racing, and I can't fall asleep. And then, an hour and a half passes and I'm getting frustrated and I'm worried about the next day. And I'm just tossing and turning. And I'll say, like, well, what do you do cognitively? What do you mean? Well, do you play any mind games to help distract you, to help you fall asleep? And it's like, what do you mean? And it's like, well, if you just surrender yourself to your anxiety and your thought process in that moment, and you don't do anything to push back on that or to try to alter that, then yeah, you're never going to fall asleep.
Yeah.
It'd be like trying to fall asleep while you're running a marathon. Your body is getting a lot of signals that you shouldn't fall asleep. You know, why don't you fall asleep when you're running a marathon? Because there's a part of your brain that's like, you're running, you're outside,
Yeah.
don't fall asleep. Well, another thing is if you're thinking about a problem
Right.
and you're worried and you're scared, your body's like, well, don't fall asleep. You got unfinished business.
Yeah.
You got like something's wrong. You got to resolve this somehow. Otherwise, if I fall asleep, that'll be bad
The
for
lion will eat you.
you. Well, because clearly you're working on something.
Yeah.
So I'm for your sake, you know, body, I'm not going to fall asleep because you're still working on something. You're giving me all the other signals you want to fall asleep, but clearly you're not ready. You know what I mean? So you have to tell your body that you're ready by not doing that, and you have to play these cognitive games, mindfulness, lots of other things. So I think some people don't have the ability, because it's not natural, because we're not taught this, about like for Junie, for example, because this has happened to me too. Like, it's not often, but there are times when I'll see a creepy movie.
Yeah.
And I'll come home and it'll be dark out, and I'll just get that thought, you know.
And Beardo jumps out of the shadows, and you're like, Beardo.
Yeah. And I am scared. I have a nervous reaction, and I'm paranoid. You know, I'm like, is something gonna? And so, if I just don't push back on that, and I'm just like, I just surrender myself to my, you know, instincts, then yeah, it's going to have a greater effect on me. I don't do that. What I do is I go, Kirk, it's just a movie. Nothing is going to jump out at you. Your body thinks something's going to, but tell your body take a deep breath. Because like one of the things that people will, I'll do, like, I'll tell you one story that relates to this. So as a kid, I would take the garbage out for the trucks.
Right.
And we had this long driveway, not super long, but
it's in Issaquah in like the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, especially when I was a kid, it's basically like the woods.
Yeah.
Like growing up, my house, you couldn't see any other houses from my house. We were a cabin in the woods.
Yeah.
You know, and I had to take the garbage cans up this dirt road to the main street where the garbage trucks would come, and there's no street lights.
Right.
At least back then, and there's no cars. It's rural. It's pitch black.
But can you use your cell phone's flashlight?
Right. So, and I obviously could have used a flashlight, but I was too lazy. So a lot of times I'd be taking the garbage cans up, and back then we had those metal garbage cans without wheels.
Oh, right. Yeah.
It's so dumb, you know, like when you see the design of garbage cans today, you're just like, why did we not have this design when I was a kid? It just would have been so much easier.
Right.
Yeah, so I'm basically carrying like a Oscar the Grouch style garbage can, you know, like and think about a family of 6, like how much garbage you could cram into a garbage can. Anyway, so I'm carrying the garbage can up, sometimes in pitch black, but I had memorized my driveway so well that I could with my feet kind of know where I was in the, you know, I'd see these faint images. So imagine just walking in pitch black where you can see the Milky Way.
Right.
And I would get to the top and I'd, you know, put the garbage can down and I'd turn around and it would just be this abyss heading down back into the woods.
Yeah.
And I'd be walking, you know, and I'd always say, okay, remember, you're okay.
There's no bears around. Oh, wait.
But then I'd hear a little twig break, you know, from the woods. And I'd be like, everything's fine. And then you start hallucinating.
Yeah.
You know, I'd see something. Every once in a while, like 1 out of every 50 times, something would kind of click in me. And I'd be like, fuck it, run. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'd be 13 and I'd just be sprinting in the darkness. Just
miraculously not injuring yourself.
Now you're making so much noise as a runner, you know, that you've lost your ability to detect anything. And now someone could be running behind you, but you wouldn't be able to hear him.
And you're probably actually hearing it now. You're like,
yeah,
well, wait, there is someone running behind.
Right. So as I would, go off of that cliff, now I'm positive something's going to kill me. Now I'm running real fast. I'm running toward the door, and I'm bursting through the door and slamming it behind me.
Because as we know, powerful, secret, mystical creatures stop when the doors are closed.
Yeah. They're afraid of the light.
Yeah.
And so I think but most of the time I'd say to myself, calm down. Because if you freak out, you're going to want to run.
Right.
And then you'll really get scared because you won't be aware of your surroundings, and you'll kind of lose your brain. That's a cognitive trick. And if you don't have that, or you don't trust it, then if you watch a horror movie and you come home at night and you're a little creeped out by the darkness and you have no way of pushing back on that, then it's going to have a greater effect.
Dude, that just happened to me last weekend. So you know how we did the episode on the lighthouse?
Yeah.
Well, in preparation for that, I had watched The Witch, which I hadn't watched before.
Yeah.
By the way, I got into a big debate with my friend Ron because he swore I had already seen The Witch, and I said I didn't like it. And I was like, no, I've never watched The Witch, and I loved it. But anyways, so I watched it, really loved it. It was pretty freaky. Last weekend, I was in Lopez Island, which is like a small island here near Seattle. And I was staying at this one rented place, and it was in the middle of nowhere. Like Lopez Island is there's not a lot of people there anyways. It's just a lot of empty space. And it was late at night. There's no street lights there either, just like you're describing. And I went to the car, I forget what I was doing, and then the automatic lights by where the car was went off as I'm walking back. And now I'm walking in very, very dark. And I had just seen The Witch like 2 days before that or something. So I'm sitting there, and I had to do that thing with my head where I'm like, all right, well, yes, you can't see anything, but
so you stripped naked and walked in.
Yes, and I flew. But that was like one of those moments. Now, granted, I'm in my 40s, but it's kind of your mind still plays tricks on you. So.
And I'm gonna guess that you played a cognitive trick or a skill of saying, Berto, your body is freaked out, and you have notions. Yeah. But it's just because you watched a movie. There's no boogeyman in the darkness.
That's right.
You said that to yourself.
I did.
Okay. Some people do not have that skill, or they don't trust that skill. And I think that's another factor. Now, I'm not saying that's everyone. And of course, I have no idea because I'm speculating on this whole thing. But I think there's a lot of factors. Again, past trauma, prone to anxiety, not habituated to these movies, above average empathy for that sort of depiction where you viscerally feel for people on the screen. Like some people, my mother-in-law is like this, even greater than Stacy. So, whenever you see your spouse, you just looked at the parents.
Yeah.
And when my mother-in-law, she loves watching movies. But when she watches anything, particularly movies where there's action going on, she's so viscerally affected that she vocalizes a lot. She'll just be, oh no, she like you're watching a tense scene, and she's screaming at the screen, because she can't hold it in. She's not just sort of like, oh, I'm watching a movie.
It's like me watching Curb Your Enthusiasm, where I have to hide behind the couch.
Exactly. So you literally might be cringing your body.
Yeah.
Like, oh no.
I literally do that.
Yeah. Because it's getting into your cells.
Yeah.
And for people like that, I think these movies are, going to have a greater effect. Because the movies are designed for people like Berto, who are habituated to the form, who like the art form, who aren't as viscerally affected. They're sort of viscerally affected, but not as viscerally affected.
Right. And if you don't make it intense enough, I'm not going to like it.
Right. So I think there's a lot of reasons why, Junie, you are the way that you are. I will say that, well, anyway, moving on. Let's do some patron shout-outs to some new patrons.
Shout. Patrons are out.
So, Berto, as I say each person's name, I want you to say the first thing that comes to your mind. And these are all people who are on Patreon, who have become a patron, who have a picture of themselves, because, I don't know, it's just good to see who our people are. I just like to, putting a face with a name is always nice. And most people don't put a picture of themselves on Patreon. So we got Alice.
Alice in Wonderland. What a fantastical trip that is.
We got patron Brandon from
Stark?
from California.
Brandon is a warrior, I can tell.
We got patron Janetta from LV. What country is LV?
That's where Genève is from.
Latvia?
Latvia. Genève from Latvia. Oh my gosh, I hope it is Latvia, because if not,
I don't. Well, what would it be?
I don't know.
LV. It's got to be Latvia. Is Latvia
Lebanon? Lebanon.
Anyway, Stephanie from Georgia.
Stephanie, how good it is to meet thee.
Luciana from I don't know where.
Luciana, is she like the niece of Pavarotti, or?
Margarita from Texas.
Wasting away in Texas with Margaritaville.
We got Deanne from I don't know where.
Dirty Deanne.
We got
Whoa.
Nicole from Washington.
When I was little, I had a crush on Nicole in my class, but I called her Nickel.
We got Jessica from Nevada, Las Vegas.
Jessica, Rabbit stole our hearts.
The other Latvia. We got Didem from Seattle.
Didem? Like Didi?
Didem.
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 We got Ted from Maryland.
Does he do talks all the time?
We got Alicia from Ohio.
Alicia is my grandma's name, and my other grandma's name, and my aunt's name. There's a lot of Alicias in my life.
Patricia.
Patricia. I went to a Tolo dance with a Patricia in high school.
We got Daniela from Allentown, Pennsylvania.
So we're living here in Daniela town. Dun, dun, dun.
So let's go to Facebook and look at some recent polls. So I gave on Facebook every Thursday I do a poll.
Uh-huh.
And we did a poll on pizza versus nachos. Where do you think people panned out on that poll?
First of all, I'd go pizza, but pizza.
So what percentage? What percentage? What are
70,
you? What percentage are you? Pizza versus
nachos? I'm like 90-10.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, do you not like nachos?
I like chips with salsa. Nachos, not so much.
Why?
Because I don't know. I never grew up with nachos. It's a foreign concept to me.
Do you think it's because you haven't had good nachos?
Could be.
Because there's some.
That's true. Like movie nachos are disgusting.
Yeah,
to
most nachos are terrible. Like 7-Eleven movie, the Cheese Whiz. It's awful.
Yeah.
Like compared to pizza.
Oh yeah.
Forget about it.
Even bad pizza is okay.
But like a good diner that really, or Matador, for example.
Okay.
You take some chips.
Yeah.
Good, crispy, not stale chips. They're not too thick. Like the movie nachos, the chips are often like too thick.
Doritos.
You put some cheese on, then you put more chips on top. You put more cheese. You put more. It's like you got.
Are there jalapenos?
There's jalapenos.
Ooh, okay.
There's sour cream.
I'm liking it.
There's
now.
olives. There's onions. Maybe there's some kind of protein.
Sure.
You have all the fixins.
Yeah,
and it comes to you on a very, very boiling hot platter with the cheese crusted on it, and the chips do not get soggy.
All right. 80-20.
Okay. So for me, I'm like 60-40 nachos.
Oh, you prefer nachos?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Well,
Yeah.
I like them both. But
Yeah.
anyway, most people were pizza. Like,
Yeah, of course.
everyone's like, but then some people like Spencer are like easy nachos, of course.
Wow.
Yeah. So
I mean, for me, first of all, when I was a little kid, my 3 favorite foods were, and in this order, coming in at number 3, hot dogs. Coming in at number 2.
So that's a good example. So with hot dogs, you can have a shitty hot dog.
You definitely can.
But you can also have a Seattle dog that has
amazing.
cream cheese
Right.
and is a gourmet bun, and
Right.
there's a lot of variance.
variety.
Whereas with pizza, I feel like you can. I've had buffet pizza that was passable. You know what I
Right.
mean? That looked like it had no cheese on it, and it just had some kind of thing like drizzled onto it.
And so number 2 for me was pizza, and number 1 was hamburgers. And again, with hamburgers, you could have a wide variety.
Right.
But keep in mind, this is the context is McDonald's,
Right.
basic pizza, and like whatever basic hot dog, right? Like that was the context. You know what they did in this? There was this burger place in Bogota. They caught on to this and they started selling, get this, pizza flavored burgers and hot dog flavored burgers.
How do you have a hot dog flavored burger?
I don't know. I don't want to know.
Well, you know Triple X in Issaquah?
Yeah.
They serve a monster burger.
Right.
That, you know how sometimes you get monster burgers and you're like, well, it's a big burger. No. Triple X, it's like, I don't know. It's like
it's gigantic.
Yeah, it's like a foot across.
Yeah.
Or I don't know if I'm exaggerating, but big. And it's so big that they have room to cut
hot dogs in half.
Hot dogs like down the middle and splay them out throughout. And there's ham and there's, obviously a burger patty. Right. Anyway.
It's ridiculous over the top.
Yeah. And their hot dogs are like amazingly gigantic too.
Yeah.
Anyway, another poll I put on Facebook for everyone was, is it okay to listen to Michael Jackson music?
Oh, right.
What percentage do you think said yes, and what percentage do you think said no?
70 yes.
Pretty close, 86 and 14.
Okay.
So most people said it is okay, because remember, to a previous poll, 99% of our listeners believe that in all likelihood Michael Jackson was guilty of abusing children sexually.
Right. So even with that.
Keeping that in mind, 86% say, yeah, it's okay to listen to his music, which I was surprised by. I thought
that is surprising.
I thought there'd be more people saying like, no, you can't listen to his music. Good old Natasha, patron, she says, we met her. She says, I personally feel gross when I hear his music. Come on. Obviously, it's technically great, but it's just ugh. So she's just talking more about her own personal experience. Matt agrees with her.
I don't disagree with that sentiment.
Yeah. Ophelia says the same thing. I feel nauseous when I hear his music. Lee says, I've noticed I don't feel good when I listen to it anymore. Jenny says, musical genius and contributions to pop culture are undeniable. He was a sick individual, no question. I don't think, maybe I'm ignorant of the details, but the music itself was not at the expense of children. If it were, then I think the conversation would be different and it would be more clear cut. So she's saying like, look, the music was separate from the abuse of the children. It's not like he, needed to abuse children to create this music. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's like two separate things.
Oh, that's a very interesting point, right? Like what if there is this director?
Well, there's an example.
Right.
Woody Allen,
right?
Manhattan.
Right.
He hires on purpose a cute young actress, which I can't remember her name, but she grew up to be an actress later in life. And he plays, he wrote the part for himself where he falls in love with a teenager.
Oh, okay.
In that movie, it's like, and I think if
is that the same?
She might have talked about how she felt uncomfortable on set with him and this kind of thing. Anyway,
yeah. So that's an example of where it's like, whoa, the art is getting intermixed with a thing you disagree with or whatever.
Right. Yeah. The other thing to think about is that Michael Jackson's music, a lot of other people contributed to it.
Right.
Quincy Jones, and a lot of other people. Yeah. But I don't know. As we talked about in the episode, it's just impossible to. There's no clear answer to that question.
It's a personal choice.
Yeah. Where you landed?
Oh, I landed in like I definitely still listen to it. There are a couple songs that make me particularly feel a little strange.
Pretty Young Thing.
Yeah, even though I love that song. But anyways, I do listen to it. I don't try to rationalize it as much as like I'm just okay with it. I still love the music. Basically, I still really enjoy the music. But and when I listen to it in general, like Thriller and a lot of the other songs, I don't immediately start feeling bad. But if I think about it, I feel bad.
It makes you wonder if there are other either coded messages or inadvertent references to if he did abuse those children, what mattered to him. So if we live in because we don't know, none of us can know because none of us were there. But if we believe, or if it did happen, if a world exists, if we live in a world where Michael Jackson did abuse children,
right?
it was according to the theory anyway, this was essentially his love life. It wasn't like some sadistic thing that he got off on. It was he was attached romantically to younger people, and we know that that's a phenomenon. It's not unheard of. It's a well-documented phenomenon among humans. So
so what other songs?
So with Pretty Young Thing, for example, was he inadvertently, because as a songwriter yourself, we're both songwriters. When we create lyrics, music also, but lyrics also, we don't really know where they come from.
Yeah, a lot of times you don't realize connections till later.
Yeah, you're just coming up with phrases that kind of make sense to you. Maybe you have a meaning in there somewhere, but you're like, later on you look back and you're like, that was interesting. You know, like from what depths did that, particularly if you're writing more metaphorical things, you know?
Oh, Lucy in the Sky oh yeah.
So might Michael Jackson, interesting speculation, have had mildly conscious things emerge, like in Pretty Young Thing.
Human nature?
Because doesn't he talk about like, anyway.
Annie, are you okay?
There's certain phrases, because that's always something that has always not, you're a vegetable. Have you know that line?
Vegetable.
Yeah, like there's a lot of phrases in his lyrics that don't make a lot of sense, and the reason why, I believe, because if you listen to his demo versions, a lot of times he hasn't really written the lyrics yet.
Right.
And this is something that I did a lot.
I remember that.
You wouldn't do this. What I would do is I would always write the tune and the melody. I would write everything before I wrote the lyrics, and I would make up vocalizations because there or phrases that didn't make any sense.
I remember we would rehearse, and I thought that I just wasn't understanding what you were saying. So I remember asking, like, "What is that thing you're saying?" You're like, "Oh, I don't know."
Yeah, I haven't written the lyrics yet, but I'd be like, "But to be good low to put it down," I'll just say these weird words because I didn't want to think about the lyrics yet. I was thinking more about the way the song felt,
Yeah.
And like, "You're a vegetable," I'm quite positive was just something that randomly popped into his head, and it fit the cadence of a phrase that he would later apply words to.
Yeah.
A good example of this is with Thriller. There's a demo version of Thriller that he wasn't originally supposed to be like a
horror
song. It was supposed to just be like a standard R&B hit, probably a love song of some sort. And there's all these phrases that he kind of throws in, but it's clear he's just kind of making stuff up. And it just makes you wonder, like, what lyrics, because I'm bad, Shaman,
right.
You know what I mean? Like,
and grabbing himself all the time.
Right. It's just like, it's sort of interesting to think, because in his
Dirty
world,
Diana. Yeah,
because in his world, if he did those things and the accounts are correct, which we'll never know, his romantic love, whenever he really thought about what was in his heart, he was thinking about younger people.
Yep.
And so when he was singing love songs, and the more I talk about it, the more I'm like, yeah, I guess you can't listen to any Michael Jackson music.
But how about ABC?
Yeah, well, he didn't write those lyrics, right? So,
oh, really? Oh, is that his dad or something? Or brothers?
I don't know who wrote those songs. Okay. He might have contributed, kind of. But
yeah, of course, he was very little, right?
He was seven years old, yeah. Anyway.
This in fact, when he was being abused himself.
Let's see. But there were a lot of people who said they felt it was okay. Emily actually said, "Hell nah to the nah, nah, nah."
Interesting.
Vanessa, top fan Vanessa says, "I'm scared that if we start to throw away anything created by shitty people, we wouldn't have much left. I figure we should take whatever good things these people bring to the world without the hero worshiping." So that's an interesting thing.
Yeah.
So you could listen to the song while totally acknowledging, look, this person, I believe did a bad thing.
Yeah.
That's how I feel about Woody Allen movies, because it's pretty clear that Woody Allen has done some bad things. Same with what's his face, who did Chinatown. God, I can't remember that guy's name. Anyway,
Polanski.
Yeah, Roman Polanski. Yeah. Roman Polanski. Yeah. Anyway, going on to another question here. Oh, I wanted to talk about The King, the movie. It's a Netflix movie starring Timothy Chalamet. Have you seen it?
No.
Joel Edgerton and Robert Pattinson. I'd watch it. I think it's a pretty good movie. It's very Games of Thrones-y, but it's
Is it based in reality or fiction? Okay.
Henry V, I believe. There's a real famous battle between the English and the French because they were always at war, a battle of Agincourt, where it's like a mythical battle in which the English won against, difficult odds, and it's typically attributed to the English longbow, but that's an oversimplification of it. And anyway, it's an interesting story, but so here's my big thesis.
Oh, and sorry, is it a movie or a series?
It's a movie. It's a Netflix movie. Yeah. So did you see The Outlaw King with Chris Pine?
The Outlaw King, no.
Very similar movie.
Okay.
Also Netflix.
Okay.
Last year. There's this new trope that they're doing with these historical fiction movies where everything is dour and everything, there's the kings never have any fun. They don't really want to be king.
I see.
But they're thrust into it.
Yeah.
They are, I don't know, kind of flawed. The music is very, very Nolan-y, Yeah. Think, Dunkirk.
Yeah.
There's no fun in Dunkirk.
No fun to be had in Dunkirk.
Yeah.
Amazing movie with zero fun.
Yeah. There's never a smile. There's never a joke. There's never a light moment. And in that movie, I think it makes sense. And looking back, I'm not like, well, there should have been. Kings are people who occasionally have fun, and plus most kings want to be king.
Yeah.
They want the power and they're trying to get the power. Yeah. But there's this new trope of casting Americans or Canadians as kings in Europe, but also this notion of just they don't want to, and they're thrust into it. It's very dour, and they stare off into the sunset, and and another trope that is in both of these movies is they will depict some famous battle that is well known in certain circles, because The Outlaw King does the same thing, and they have to, because it's fucking Hollywood, the evil king and the good king have to face in battle.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Because that happened all the time.
Yeah. In both those movies, they force this confrontation between our hero king and the evil guy on the battlefield, which never happened in either story, and no one would think it would.
No.
Because in the throe of battle, people are dying, and this is real,
Right.
and a lot of times kings were at the forefront of these battles.
Yeah.
That's well known. Henry V actually was well known and he was a good fighter, and he, would get injured sometimes.
Right.
And but this notion that, and in both movies, what they did is essentially you're in ninth grade in the hallway, and everyone
splits up.
Everyone forms a circle around the two, between the bully and the other guy, and they duke it out while everyone watches.
Right.
In the middle of a battle. Anyone who's watching, I hope, would go well, what?
Yeah.
That doesn't make any sense. You're trying to kill each other. Why would you stop?
Imagine seeing that in a World War II movie.
Yeah, right. In that context, you'd be like Hitler. It's the same as if FDR and Hitler somehow met and faced each other in battle, or Rommel and Patton. You know what I mean? Somehow,
Winston Churchill shows up.
Yeah,
I've had enough of you.
Yeah, we would all go, that's ridiculous. They
should totally do that.
Yeah. They're doing this in movies all the time, and it's driving me crazy because they're trying to make a really good movie. They're trying to, and they spend millions of dollars getting the costumes right. Right. In The King, for example, the one with Chalamet, the costumes are great. The good thing I will say about The King is that in a lot of movies that they make about these times is they don't really depict the fact that armor was such a thing, you know? like in Game of Thrones, they have a little bit of plate armor, but not a lot, because otherwise you wouldn't see the face and you couldn't identify the people on the battlefield. But during these, armor times, you would have this huge, heavy suit of armor that covered almost every single inch of your body, and you were just bludgeoning each other. In fact, Seattle near Green Lake, I used to drive by this place where these guys would show up in full armor and battle in real life.
Oh, wow.
Like it was like a recreation of what battling must have been like back then.
Yeah.
And sometimes I would stop and watch them, and I've watched YouTube videos about this too. We have this notion like, oh, they have swords, and you would stab each other. Well, the arms race was such that the armor became so good at protecting you from stabbing things that eventually they started using these long swords as essentially giant bats.
Yeah.
And what you're trying to do was bludgeon the other person for them to fall down, and then you would take out a little stiletto knife
and find a way to get it in.
Find an opening. You would be standing on top of them while they're sort of weighted down by their own armor, and you would sort of work the blade in somewhere, and that's how you would kill them.
Yeah. Can't you I heard that if you step back and use like a sniper rifle or your pistol and aim for the orange bits. Oh wait, I'm thinking of Halo. Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. And, because imagine you have one of these iron helmets on, and that longsword comes full on whack across the side of your head. It's not going to go in your head,
no.
But the full force of that sword.
You're getting knocked out.
Yeah, you're going to go down. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or another thing that would happen was you would wail as hard as you could on the shield arm, and it would break the person's arm.
Right.
And then the arm would go limp, and then you could start beating on him more, and then you could slide, And so in this movie, The King, with Chalamet and Edgerton and Pattinson, you get a sense of that. You get a sense of like just how protective the armor was and how much of a role it played. Anyway, so a fun movie about history. I think I might have given it a 5 or 6, maybe a 4. I'm not sure. If you like history, watch The King. I mean, do you like that kind of stuff?
I like some aspects of it, but in general, I haven't tended, like when movies come out that are a movie about medieval times that's not fantastical, I don't tend to care too much.
Interesting.
So I like if they're like magical or something.
Man, not me. Any history of that kind, samurai history, World War II.
I'd be more into I'd be more into a samurai thing,
like the Tom Cruise movie.
Maybe, yeah.
The Last Samurai.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah, there's so many problems with that.
I
movie.
loved Shogun when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And
okay.
the David.
Well, I'm surprised that you wouldn't.
What was his name?
I can't remember.
Yeah.
But Chamberlain.
Chamberlain. Yeah.
I'm surprised then that you wouldn't also like Knights movies, because that's very similar.
I mean, I guess because. Yeah, I don't know why. That's a good question. Yeah, I mean, maybe because I grew up with Arthur and the Legend of Arthur, and so like it was always there had to be some mystical thing about it. And like I do like Robin Hood, Disney's Robin Hood.
I fart in your general direction. Well, that does it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle, in which we did random things. Thanks for joining us out there. We both fart in your general direction, and please take care of yourself, because